First of all, why 1815 to 1820? Well, it's obviously an old mastermind tactic. Choose as small and obscure a topic as you possibly can, and then you're safe. That was my first error. There turns out to be an awful lot of stuff. Oh dear. Seriously though, another reason is that it's what we in the trade call a neglected area. It's the late Georgians, and it's before the early Victorians, and it gets a bit neglected. So we'll do a little bit to remedy that, hopefully. The topic, as Gary said, is pedestrianism, but it's a subcategory of pedestrianism. I've limited myself, because of the amount of material, to ultra-distance, multi-day race walking events of not less than 300 miles. A lot was going on of less than 300 miles, obviously, right down to sprints. But life is short, and we've got to limit it somehow. I'll start with a quick chronological trip through the period, and then I'll come back and make some general comments about the period, and I will witter on until Gary tells me to stop. It's September 1815, a Monday morning. This is George Wilson. He's a 51-year-old, rather weedy peddler from Newcastle on Tyne, and he's at Blackheath, South London, and he's starting to walk 50 miles a day for 20 days, i.e. 1,000 miles in total. The weather's good. He's caught the public mood, and by the end of the week, Blackheath is the scene of unparalleled festivities. Booths and tents have been set up. Many have music, dancing, 3 or 4 waiters serving drink, all of it on licence. In the Hare and Billet, the pub he's based at, sales of beer up top 300 gallons a day. An acting troupe is preparing to set up a theatre under canvas. An elephant is tethered outside the Hare and Billet, what I've learnt this morning from Peter to call a celebrity animal, and it trumpets every time that Wilson passes. By now he's becoming increasingly harassed and obstructed, as you can possibly see. There are lots of images of him. This is my favourite one. He's had to rope off his track. He's got minders with big sticks and horse whips to clear the way. It's chaos on the heath. After 3 weeks of this, the authorities' nerve breaks. They arrest him, charge him with causing a breach of the peace, and the walk is aborted after a mere 750 miles. And there's a lot of literature from the period on Wilson, which you can follow up if you're ever tempted. But DNF, runners amongst you will be familiar with this ominous abbreviation, did not finish. He didn't quite get there, but soon after, down in Rochester in Kent, one William Tuffy starts off to perform the same feat, 1,000 miles in 20 days. Tuffy, in fact, is an inexperienced pedestrian, and he gives up after 12, 13 days. But that doesn't matter, because another local Kentish pedestrian, one John Baker, steps in on the same ground, and he just carries on, and he accomplishes the 1,000 miles in the 20 days. Acclamation, says the Times. The gentry and carriages applaud politely. And elephant trumpets, so presumably it's the same celebrity animal from Blackheath. I can't confirm that. Maybe every town had a celebrity elephant. Meanwhile, as they say, back on Blackheath, Josiah Eaton starts off. If you're familiar with Captain Barclay, he did 1,000 single miles at a mile per hour for 42 days. And he's famous for that, not least because of Peter Radford's tremendous book on Captain Barclay. It's not so well known that within 6 years, Barclay's feat had been excelled by Josiah Eaton and others. He does 1,100 miles in 1,100 hours. That's 45 days, 20 hours in total. As if that's not enough, sorry, this is Eaton, a contemporary photograph, you'll see of him walking. His career went on for another few years and they became quite famous. So famous that he got a proper engraved poster handbill. So that's him later. Meanwhile again, in Salford, which is near Bath, a certain Captain Stokes just appears from nowhere, does 1,000 miles in 20 days, no problem. Even Tuffy reappears. This is William Tuffy from Rochester. He's moved along to Maidstone. He's enlisted his 12-year-old son, and together they do a relay of 1,200 miles. Dad does about 35 miles a day, and young Tuffy, get out there, and he does 20 or 25 a day. No embarrassment about getting 12-year-olds out to kill themselves in events like this. It was quite a popular spectacle. So that's 1815. What we'll do is, I'll just run you through the remainder of the period. I won't expect you to read all of this. Just note that in 1816 we've got 10 of these massive events. Apologies, the Wilson is a glitch, a typo. He only did 1,000 miles at Hull, so you can ignore the last one. But there you are, Eaton, the man who broke Barclay's record, is at it again, only doing half miles this time, 2,000 half miles in 1,000 hours or 42 days. Easy, I know how to do it. Wilson from Blackheath is back again. A new player, now an old man, Barnett, 1,500 miles, 32 days. 1817, even more events. As you can see, some of the by now familiar names and a few new ones stepping in. Obviously, well I say obviously, but by implication, professionals, because they're doing more than one of these things. It's not just a one-off, one-in-a-lifetime event, as you might say Captain Barclay's was. These are men, this is becoming a job or a career for them, I suggest. 1818, the peak year in a sense of our period, 15 of these ultra events, a little bit deceptive because only 5 of them top the 1,000-mile mark. We're getting into quoted shorter events now, 600, 640, this sort of area. 1819, only 2 professionals walking, mostly Crisp, Daniel Crisp, who just doesn't finish any of his ultras amazingly. The amazing thing is that people kept backing him and betting on him. So he was a great walker. He took on competitions, matches which were just too much even for him. There were multi-day, town-to-town walks on very bad roads, brave but ill-advised. And in 1820, it's really the end of the mania period. And we didn't have another long-distance mania period until the 1840s, and then the 1870s after that. Right, a little bit of a background, can't say much, but just to say that long-distance pedestrianism didn't appear suddenly from nothing in 1815. It has a long history. The earliest one I can trace in my sort of definition of ultra is a 300-mile walk in Hyde Park in 1709 by a named pedestrian. Most famously, within living memory, Foster Powell, that some of you may have heard of, did famous walks from London to York and back, called it 400 miles in 5 days. Captain Barclay, we know about, achieved his 1,000 miles in 1809, and Walter Tong's great book on the captain came out in 1813 and obviously contributed to the Pedestrian Mania. All right, that's the chronology briefly in the background. Now just some general points that might arise from all this. To what extent was long-distance pedestrianism a classy event? It had been in the previous century. Up until the mid-18th century, you did get aristocrats who kept their own running footman to bet on, because it was cheaper than keeping a racehorse. That had died out by the 1750s, 60s. But in our period, there are references to the aristocracy turning up at a few of our events. For example, when Eton and Baker walked their 2,000-mile match at Wormwood Scrubs, the aristocracy were said to be out in force, and a royal prince, the Duke of Gloucester, gave 10 quid to each of the pedestrians. Big money. One aspect that struck me is that there seemed to certainly have been a middle-class or gentry audience for these events. The highlighted red events are at pleasure gardens. If we add in a few one-day events, 50, 55 milers in pleasure gardens, you see that, for example, the Blenheim Gardens in Gloucester opened in 1812. The usual thing: balls, dining, fireworks displays, pigeon shooting, and an 8-day walk by John Wright and a 20-day walk, which supposedly attracted 5,000 spectators allegedly. The Sydney Gardens in Bath. Jane Austen and family had patronised that a few years earlier. That hosted a big match. Robert Tinker's Vauxhall Gardens in Manchester. Collyhurst, that didn't survive into your period now. I think it had been gone by the 1820s. But Birmingham, a couple of long events there, Norwich, Great Yarmouth. So obviously the proprietors of these rather posh gardens thought it was worth attracting the middle classes. They tried to get the ladies. We look after the comfort and convenience of the ladies. There'll be no unsavoury characters allowed in. A little bit of class distinction here. Admission to ladies and gentlemen, 1 and 6pence. And you get 6pence back in cake and buns. Servants and working people a shilling, and they get their 6pence worth of liquor in return. So that would be fun. Let's go to the garden and spend all day watching some poor sod walking round and round for 1,000 miles. But oops. We'll move on a little bit about finance and money and so on. Inside a pleasure garden, obviously, you can charge admission money, gate money. What about outside the garden? A bit more difficult. It's axiomatic in pedestrian history that all pedestrian matches were for a wager or a bet. That you wouldn't have had pedestrian matches unless you had a bet. In our type of pedestrian event, you bet on Eaton or Wright or Wilson completing the 1,000 miles or giving up and dying before the 20 days, and you win or lose accordingly. It's sort of assumed that there always was a wager involved in these 51 events, so much so that it's very often not even mentioned. The newspapers mention when there's a particularly large amount of money at stake, but otherwise it seems to be just assumed that there's always a bet involved somewhere. The more interesting thing is, and what hasn't come out much in the literature, is the extent to which a lucky pedestrian might acquire a committee of respectable local people, middle classes, who would support him, look after him, and raise money on his behalf. And luckily, found this in the Medway archives in Strood recently. It's a handbill from 1815. Baker was doing 1,000 miles, and it says a number of respectable persons have formed themselves into a committee to look after Baker and organise his event. It talks about raising money in 15 named pubs in Rochester and Strood, Chatham, Maidstone, etc. And there's a lovely little document as well in the archives. It says that, if you can read it, the committee present their most respectable compliments to Mr. Pym, the local member of the committee, and will it esteem it a favour if he will collect and pay over the subscriptions. If any of you have got sponsorship to run your local 10K or the London Marathon or whatever, you'll know that the running is easy. The difficult thing is extracting the money from the source afterwards if you agreed to pay it. And this is a wonderful little example of the same thing from 200 years ago. And there are lots of examples of our walkers. A lot of these walks, I won't go into the details, there's too much. A lot of these walks were on turnpike roads from place to place, and there are often comments about locals in the towns that the pedestrian passed through, raising subscriptions, offering money, etc.
2 minutes.
If you weren't out on the road, where were you? This, by the way, is one of the great road walkers, Daniel Crisp, a rare picture of him. If you weren't on the road, you were in a pub or attached to a pub. And one question is, we know by the 1840s pubs were starting to enclose grounds, their own pedestrian grounds, the start of athletics grounds as such. In our period, Captain Stokes did 1,000 miles in 20 days near Bath, and this is the pub as it was at the time. If you look on Google, it looks not too dissimilar, and there's a huge walled beer garden out the back. That was probably where he walked, so it must be a very early example of an enclosed, effectively pedestrian ground. I say that because the newspapers say the captain stopped and took his breaks in a summer house by the track, where he had 2 glasses of port negus, so he was probably within the pub grounds. And there was one of our long races at the Bowling Green pub on Scotland Road in Liverpool, and there's one that was fairly obviously an enclosure at the Duke's Head in Barking. But beyond that, you just find an adjacent field where you walked up and down on the road near or outside the pub. And that continued through the 20s and 30s. Was more or less came to an end with the Towns Clauses Act of 1845 or thereabouts. That began to put the frighteners on the pedestrians. And lastly, what, if anything, can we say about who these professional pedestrians were? First of all, getting the amateurs out of the way. Out of our 51 events, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can classify as gentlemen amateurs, i.e. they're called Mr. or Captain in the reports, and they do it for the love of sport, and in 3 reported cases for a wager of 200 guineas. So they were amateurs only in the 19th century, early 19th century sense of the word. They're betting 20 to 50,000 quid on the event. Amongst the professionals, if we can call them that, 1815 were pre-census, so the prosopography, thanks for the word, Dave, it's a bit rudimentary, but what we can discover is that unskilled couple of labourers, 3 peddlers. That was obviously good training for walking 1,000 miles. If that's your day job, walking 20 or 30 miles selling stuff, but the rest are sort of skilled working class. A couple of bakers, don't know why. Used to getting up early in the morning, maybe, makes you fit. Bricklayer, same argument. Silk weaver, can't explain that. A tailor and ostler. Not trying to be nasty to Esther Crozier. She did have 6 children, so the fact she doesn't have a named job is neither here nor there. There were 2 female pedestrians, just 2 points to make and then I'll finish. Oops. Mary Frith, an unconfirmed 600-mile event in 1816. People who've written on the subject say she walked the 600 miles. There's actually no confirmation that she even started, we don't know. We know that Esther Crozier did, because she got about 300 miles, 400, before she stopped after a financial dispute. But we have 2 female pedestrians. It's well known that before this period, what are called smock races were well known. That's to say, short, women-only races for prizes. So it's not to me terribly surprising that some of them moved up to long distances. And in the 1820s, there's one other long-distance female pedestrian. And they did reappear in a later long-distance boom in the 1870s. Just to make a point, to confirm other research, there was a big overlap between prize fighters and pedestrians. This is one example, Henry Barnett, who was backed and trained by some prize fighters, and they formed his seconds in a 42-day match. But it's just to confirm the research at other periods that they shared the same trainers and the same financial backers and went to the same clubs. So it's just a bit of confirmatory. And finally, obviously if you're walking for 20 or 45 days, you can't do much else, and you've got to train for several months beforehand, and you've got to recover afterwards. So if you're going into it at all, probably you've got to commit yourself at least for a limited period or a period of years. And it seems, certainly we can show this period, that at least 1/3 of our pedestrians from this 5-year period did have careers of at least 3 years, and in some cases much longer. The number of known events is, as they say, work in progress. You can probably add to these numbers and in some cases double them. But it certainly was becoming, or had become already, a recognised profession, the ultra-long distance version of pedestrianism. And the next stage in the research is to take that hopefully through the 1820s and 30s and 40s. So that's it. I've now lost my wager to finish 18 pages in 20 minutes, so I'll shut up.